We're going to be pretty straightforward. This is a non-competitive hackathon, so everyone worked together on different projects. We did split up into groups, but there was lots of sharing back and forth. And I just thought we could take some time to share the work that people did over the last day. The first group to go up is the group that worked on privacy notices. So I'm just going to invite you up to do your presentation.
I'm Michelle Bernstein from Code for Boston, a volunteer tech organization in Boston. I'm a programmer and a team lead. Is that what I'm supposed to say?
That sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm Michael Hoffrichter from Houston Volunteer Lawyers, and I joined the project yesterday morning.
I'm Kate Frank. I'm the content manager for ctlawhelp.org. And in the 8 hours that we had to put together our project, we also had to put together the presentation. So, do you want to start?
Start the presentation?
I can draw.
I don't have any words. Okay.
You know what I'm going to do?
Yeah.
I have notes. 1 second.
One moment. In the meantime, I'm going to vamp. I'm not. That's not true. Hit the space bar, but I think we'll wait for the words. I'm not hitting anything on any computer.
As we're introducing this, sorry, we didn't rehearse this all, but
Yeah.
I'm assuming everyone knows what a hackathon, I shouldn't assume that everyone knows what a hackathon is. So let me just explain that first. What we did is we took this group of people that are here now and some other people who are going to present in just a few minutes. We all got together. We had done some brainstorming ahead of time to identify some projects, which we narrowed down to 4. And we spent 8 hours in a room, 2 rooms actually, just brainstorming and thinking and actually doing work to solve a little problem in the access to justice space with technology. Who here in the room who didn't participate in the hackathon yesterday has been in a hackathon before? So, yeah, so everyone, a few of you get the idea.
Okay. So, none of us are technical or legal experts in privacy specifically, and that's part of why we wanted to address this. The project was a privacy notice generator. Who here knows the difference between a privacy policy and a privacy notice? If you know the difference, raise your hand. Oh, good. Okay. A privacy notice is different from a privacy policy. The policy is sort of the legal language that you establish within your organization about how you're going to treat a user's data. And the notice is the information that you're communicating to the actual user. It tells the user how an organization will collect, store, use, and share their personal data. It is also sometimes called a privacy statement, or sometimes it's also called a privacy policy.
And one of the real reasons that we did this is that everyone needs one of these, right? Any website where you're getting some of this stuff is has to have something about, or should have something about, what are you doing with this information? Why are you collecting it? What do you, what's my expectation with how you're using my data as a user? And most of us, A, don't know how to write those, and B, don't know what that should consist of, and C, a lot of times we just look around for another privacy policy that we can copy, right? And that works pretty well. And then we hope that we can adjust what's in that privacy policy for our organization. And so we wanted to take a look at how can we help people write their own policies, and that was the project.
And one of the things that I've noticed as a website content manager is that we put all this time and effort into plain language and communicating on, a 5th to 8th grade reading level, but then we put this long, exhaustive privacy policy on our website, and nobody reads those, and if they tried to read them, we wouldn't necessarily understand what they meant. And I think there are sessions, I think, in this conference that talk about the ethics of collecting user data and that type of thing. Who needs a privacy notice generator? Are you collecting data? Should you be collecting data? Are you storing data? And is your site in the US, EU, or another country with privacy laws?
So one question people often don't ask themselves is, do we really need the data that we are collecting? What are we really going to use it for? A lot of people just say, oh yeah, we want data. not thinking about the impact that that has, and we're finding that that has a much more serious impact and is impacting people in a way that we cannot predict, and that's sort of emerging as technology is developing. That is an important question to ask as part of this process and something we included. What were the other questions? Oh, my goodness.
Well, the next slide is what's our solution. So our solution was to come up with an interactive guided interview to generate a custom privacy notice, again, a plain language statement to a user explaining what we're going to do with their information and how our privacy practices work. So just to kind of reiterate what you said, I'm going to look at my notes. We're starting to see that the long-term impacts of collecting user data, my notes just went away. We can't really predict what those impacts will be. Vulnerable populations have options or fewer options in choosing what services to use. And again, like I said, these are written in really complex legal language. So
Maybe hold the mic closer.
okay. Here are some screens. We worked with Documate to generate this guided interview. So I'm just going to go through a couple screens. Just sort of asking the user, so like if I'm a website manager, I may not understand exactly how data is stored, but I can answer some questions. I can go to my IT people and, answer the questions about how the data is stored. And then when you get to the end of the interview, we'll generate a PDF or a document with a plain language privacy statement that we can use on our website.
And one of the things here is that we spent a lot of time figuring out who we were writing this for, right? And talking about our audience and thinking, in this case, thinking about our audience's audience, right? We're writing this not for the end user, and to an extent we were, right? The final product is for the end user, the average consumer of this site, but we also were writing our guided interview for the website host, for the designer, for someone who had some information about the background and where this was going in the end. And I think that that's just something very cognizant to be aware of as we go through this in terms of, right, once we figured out what sort of plain language we needed for the end user, we're also thinking about what sort of language do we need to use to get that information to be able to generate it from the website developer, host, et cetera.
And with that in mind, we chose our audience to be sort of a TIG legal...
TIG recipient.
TIG recipient legal nonprofit organization because those were the users we had in the room. As a developer, there's been a lot of work in discovering that if you do not have users in the room, you are designing things that are not useful to the users. We wanted to develop for a broader crowd, and I think that would, that's on the future.
Oh, maybe.
Oh, well,
But
that'll be on the future slide, so.
It was interesting because we got hours into the project and I kept thinking, well, our users are legal aid organizations and people developing tools, thinking about this conference, but then there's also the potential pro se element. I mean, we're always developing tools for pro se parties, so that could be a really useful tool for somebody who's starting their own business and doesn't have the budget to hire an attorney to write a statement. It could be. It was interesting to see how that developed. So I have up now the slide about our challenges. So the challenges were the scope, technical jargon, third parties like how do we know how Google stores information or Twilio or Amazon, and then the big one was privacy from whom? Privacy from the government, from spouses, from employers. I mean, you could really go on and on and on talking about how data is actually protected. And then future expansion. We could add lots of other fields with clauses about what information is gathered, who can see the data, deleting that data, other data stored, third-party information. We would love to work with legal and technical professionals experienced with digital privacy to expand the options and develop terms of service and use as a result of this same interview. And here's some more resources.
And that last link is the GitHub repo for where we saved our work so far.
Our demo.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Oh, And you can try it out here. Here's the QR code.
Yeah,
Maybe you can take a picture of that and try it on your phone.
should work on your mobile device. And we worked with Dorna, the creator of Documate, as well. It was created in Documate, and it comes mobile first, if I recall correctly.
Probably.
She couldn't be here today, so. Oh, do people have questions? Should we do now?
Sure, people will. We'll do that at the end. So, the next group to come up is Everett, if you'll come up, and everyone else who worked with you on the API for eligibility.
See, Mr. Joseph, so.
Okay. Do you want to start with presenting? Or?
Yeah, that's fine. Hello, everybody. I am Everett Pompey. How are you all doing tonight? Enjoying the rain? It sounds really nice. Okay. So Joseph Schaefer and I worked on the eligibility engine, which a couple of these slides might look very familiar to people who've been at other hackathons. I'm a big believer that like a project that like really is substantial can't really just be done at a hackathon. So this has kind of been a torch I'm carrying on. So these might look a little familiar. So the eligibility engine is a crowdsourced programmatic qualification engine. And we're going to kind of break that down a little bit. So what the problem is am I eligible for a legal resource, right? If there's a legal resource out there, like a legal service provider, do you qualify for it? This can cause increased anxiety and a risk of making mistakes with whether your application or not applying for help and actually going to try and do stuff as a pro se litigant. The technical problem is how will users find it? We can build this really cool tool at a hackathon, but that doesn't mean Google's going to index it. There's also the maintenance problem of it just gets dropped on the floor after the hackathon and just kind of sits out there. And also stakeholder input. How do you easily get feedback on the app that you build? So there's a lot of cause. So poor may not be poor enough. Is kind of an issue there with trying to figure out if they qualify for that service. For LSC funding, a family of 4 from 2019 numbers, they make greater than $40,235. They do not qualify for service, so they need to possibly go look elsewhere. And so that information can be hard to find and hard to understand. And so having an easy tool to kind of automate that would be useful. So the solution is a single tool for all jurisdictions that's easy to contribute to and has low maintenance costs. And so that's the larger eligibility engine. And what we did for this hackathon is add a federal poverty API. So this is an API endpoint on Instant Attorney that essentially you can send it the household size for your income, and it will default to the current year for that and give you basically the number that you need to do those computations. And it also is more intelligent, so you can send it also the month. So if you have a preferred month when you default over, say right now we're still in 2019 numbers because the 2020 numbers haven't been released, when that switchover happens. It defaults to February. You can also do historical data all the way back to 1996 if you really care to see what the eligibility criteria was back then, in case you're running historical numbers. So we created an LSC eligibility interviews based off these numbers from the 125% to 200%, and we'll look at that a little bit later. And it integrates with Instant Attorney. So let's do a demo here. That's the fun part. So on Instant Attorney, we go and search for, let's say, bankruptcy in Wyoming. Joseph, my partner, did work there, so he knew about Legal Aid of Wyoming. So what you do is you click Qualify Now. This is going to open up another page, and I didn't trust the Wi-Fi, so I had another one open already. So what you do is you just put in your household size, right? So let's say we have 2 people, and how much money do you make a month? That is, let's say, like, what do we want to do, like $120 or something crazy low? There we go. So it says you likely qualify because you only make $125 a month, right? And you can play around with those numbers and see it back. Now, that might not be, like the most crazy earth-shattering thing. Is this, that mic is on, okay. Okay. So, so we can hit apply now, and that will send us to the Legal Aid of Wyoming, where we can start our application process here. Or we could have clicked the button to go back to the listing, and it would have brought us back to the listing. Now, what I want to demonstrate as well is where is this information coming from, right? Where is the source code that is running? It is always a little nerve-wracking to sign in front of people. Okay, so yes. Cool. So if we want to go to Legal Aid of Wyoming here, and we're going to go and look at their services. Let's just say, so we're doing money issues, so for bankruptcy. So we're going to come in here and look at the service eligibility criteria. This is the magical code that is running in that interview. Now, any partner on the site, so whether you're like a Code for America brigade, a legal hackers group, or just another hackathon, and you want to contribute to this, this is all AGPL code. So it's open source. You can contribute to it, alter it, and you just come in here, click update. I know it's not the best IDE at this point to do that, so maybe just copy and paste it in once you're done. But this is calling the API, that eligibility API, for the federal poverty guidelines and passing in the household size. And if you know how DocSemble interviews work, this is what causes it to collect that and ask that question. And this is it doing the calculations. And so it has this for all of its services. And the code that runs that is also on GitHub for the eligibility engine. So with that, I think I'll finish on up. Are there any questions?
How do you deal with, or do you deal with injection attacks?
Yeah, so this is arbitrary code execution, so there is a risk of code injection. So part of it is partners on Instant Attorney have to be approved. So when we pull the eligibility, it's from the database, from Instant Attorney. So, I mean, if I approve you as a partner and you really want to go and run whatever nonsense, I will hopefully see it and quickly remove you. But, more than likely it's just going to be a bug or something like that. And, with enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow kind of thing, and it'll hopefully get fixed. Any other questions? Yes?
Just to clarify, so the question about your income, is that Instant Attorney and then takes you to the intake thing, which is also Instant Attorney? I'm not sure which tool what you use.
Yeah. So the question about your income is from the DocAssemble interview. So as soon as we go over to let's see, like this screen or in here, this is what like Instant Attorney on the site. And then over here is the DocAssemble instance that just has a pretty color orange header, basically. And so this is running the DocAssemble interview that if I go to
DocAssemble is outside Instant Attorney, and then people get sent to Instant Attorney for the site specifically.
So we refer you to whoever the intake provider is. So whatever URL you give on Instant Attorney here. So if I'm looking at this service, if I come down to this URL here, that's where I'm going to refer you to. If you say, hey, I want to go and do the intake for that service.
The API is DocAssemble pulling. You don't have to go to Instant Attorney. Your code is pulling the information from Instant Attorney, right?
Qualification. Does that run? You can run that on your own interview. It doesn't have to be part of Instant Attorney.
Correct. Yeah. And the interview is open source, so if you want to pull that in and run your own DocAssemble instance that does the same thing, then you're welcome to. I don't know if I'm answering your question at all.
Okay, so just to clarify.
Yeah.
DocAssemble is the interview asking about your income.
Mm-hmm.
That calls the API and Instant Attorney where you can specify what the rules are for the eligibility, and then which also has the redirect link that takes you to another instance.
Okay. So that is incorrect, and so I'll try and explain. There's a lot of moving parts. So you're on Instant Attorney. So we're here. There we go. So we're here on like the main page, and we're going to go down to Wyoming, right? And we hit Qualify Now. What this does is it passes URL. Sorry, this is getting real nerdy. It passes URL arguments into the DocAssemble instance. So it opens up the other tab, opens this up. Then this makes 2 API queries back to the server, pulls the information for the code, runs the code in the DocAssemble instance. Then once you get done, and if you hit qualify now, from that information, it will send you over to where you need to apply, and you do your application on their site. And we can talk after. Sorry to hold up everybody. Are there any other questions? Great. Thank you so much.
So, yes.
Okay, hello. So our project is called Profile Me. And to get started, I'm Jessica Frank. I'm the project manager for A to J Author. I have Tobias Enterejo with me. He is our A to J backend developer. Then we have Quentin Steenhouse from Greater Boston Legal Services, right? And Jonathan Pyle with Philadelphia Legal Assistance. So Jonathan and Quentin work together on some DocAssemble projects. Jonathan created DocAssemble. Tobias and I work together on A to J Author. So it's 2 document assembly platforms, just giving a little background before we get started. So the idea of Profile Me, first we'll talk about the problem, the solution, and the next step. So the problem is we have these multiple document assembly platforms, right? So we have A to J Author, HotDocs, DocAssemble, Contract Express. There's like a ton out there, possibilities. And we're all helping people solve legal problems one-off. So we're shooting different arrows sort of at the same target. We're trying to help people complete their legal forms or get eligibility to apply for legal aid assistance. We're trying to help them understand a legal process. So it's the same sort of target that we're aiming for. And the idea of this project is that whatever document assembly platform you choose, that the authors choose, that you in the community as legal aid and court staff choose, that your end users should be able to take at least their basic information with them and move it into whatever platform they're at, so that they have that same target. One arrow is solving multiple problems. So the idea is going from whatever platform the legal aid or court chooses, the end user isn't sort of stuck in one bucket and having to re-enter their same sort of data. So here's what the users have to do now. If they go to different document assembly platforms, they have to re-enter the same sort of basic information over and over again. Their name, their address, their email, their phone, how many people are in their household, how much income do they have, all sorts of just your basic information about you. And so our idea then was to build some sort of infrastructure that they could take at least the basics and move it from one interview to another. And so both A to J Author and DocAssemble work with an infrastructure that's based on JSON. And so we knew that we could talk to each other if we were able to sort of make some modifications. So then we spent part of the morning, the first maybe hour or so, looking at and trying to figure out sort of a standard. And then we went with schema.org. So if you want to sort of explain why we picked schema.
So we're not the first people to think about this issue. It's been thought about in a variety of contexts on the internet for a while. And I thought of schema.org in part because Margaret Hagan has been working with that. But we also looked at some other standards like in the healthcare industry because they do data interchange a lot. But we settled on schema.org because it had a fairly simple representation of an individual with a lot of the fields that we thought were really common that we could sort of tap into. Because you don't want to just create your own standard out of thin air. You want to sort of latch on to something that exists, even if you do need to make some modifications to it, as we did.
So we found the structure, sort of the person, and as Jonathan said, it had pretty much everything we needed in terms of address, birth date, that kind of thing. We had to add veteran status because that wasn't available, and we added income information. So it did turn out that schema had a lot of, it didn't quite fit into the sort of civil legal aid space, but we were able to work with it. And we started mapping it. So this is the information architecture that we started with. So we have the profile type of person, and within person there's name, given name, family name. You can see their veteran status, their birth date, and then household is a type, and within each one of those can be multiple children and information about them, or other people and their relationship to you in the household. And it's not shown, but we also income was broken down into sort of how much do you make, how frequently do you get it, where does it come from, what's the name of either your employer or the source. So we tried to do the basic sort of what information would be used in an intake. So then we worked on it, and Quentin took the picture, so then I had to then add him into the picture. So. What?
I don't really live in the TV.
Right. And you weren't wearing a hat, but whatever. It's creative license when you make the slide deck and you're not the programmer, so it's a bonus there. So we spent probably like 6 hours working on this. We sort of divided the work. I worked on the A to J author interview to generate an answer file that could be mapped then to that standard. Quentin worked on the DocAssemble side to sort of do the same thing, to map their interview to a standard. Jonathan worked on building the infrastructure in DocAssemble to handle that JSON import and then export. And then Tobias worked on the ability in A to J author to import the JSON file to run it, the answer file. So here's the interview. It's just pretty straightforward. It asks a series of questions. If you want to check it out, you can run the interview. And then you want to talk about the repo just real quick.
Yes.
That mic thing.
Right, so at the repo, you'll find the code that we use to import the JSON standard that we defined with that example that was in the previous slides. It imports about half of the fields right now, since we had only so much time. And it'll generate an answer file, which is an XML. It's the same standard as hot docs. And you can import that answer file through either the preview mode or through query parameters or through A2J.org. And you can test to see what is actually re-imported. So you'll find all of that, the code, sample answer file, the sample JSON, and the A2J interview at that repo.
And then on the DocAssemble side, they also have a repo. So if you guys want to talk about that.
Yeah, so we developed, Quentin and I worked together to develop the code that allows you to import and export the JSON file with the profile me standard attached to it. We got most of the way through it, and one of the other uses we built in was how to use that standard to store information just if you're going from interview to interview on the same system. So if you're just using DocAssemble and you have a bunch of interviews that all ask standard questions, you can use this the profile me to not have to make the user repeat the same information even within the same server.
And then this is an example of the interview on the DocAssemble site. And so they have the Profile Me logo, which we'll talk about in a second with branding. And then this is an example from their output that shows what your profile is. So you ran through the interview or you uploaded it, and it has the information. Do you guys want to talk about the image?
Yeah, and one of the things we talked about was these days, a lot of users are using smartphones, and the idea of downloading a file, whether it's called an XML file or a JSON file, is a little bit weird in the days of tablets and smartphones. And so Tobias had the idea, well, what if it was an image? Because it is fairly easy on a phone to download an image. And so it turns out that there's this field called steganometry or something. Steganography, where you can hide information inside of an image. And so I created a fake image that just said your personal information is in this image. And then I found a Python package that allows you to store any arbitrary data inside of that image. It's like a watermark or something, I don't know. But because of the power of open source software, like it took me like all of 10 minutes to figure out how to do that because somebody had written code for it. So that is one way that users could download their information is as an image. But we were also thinking that it could be emailed to them, and they could store it in an email, and they could find it in their email. But that is an issue. Like, how does we want to give the user ownership of their information, but how logistically is the user going to hang on to that? And at the end of the day, I was exploring using the blockchain to do it, so we'll see if that works.
We also talked about, like if it was stored in some sort of account, like, you know, when you go to PayPal and you can verify that you want to share your bank information with whatever the Amazon or store is, but then somebody has to maintain that, and like, who's going to maintain it, who's in charge of it, how are you going to fund it? So the idea that it's easily passable, your information, that the user has it, sort of was our main motivation. And so that goes into why this idea is better than the existing solutions. So why, first off, that it's better than existing solutions is that there aren't any existing solutions for the ability for a user to move from one sort of document assembly interface to another and maintain that same sort of information. So with our solution, it gives end user empowerment. So that, with ownership rights, we have the ability for the user to possess their data, to use it however they want, they can take it with them, and to transfer their data. So they're not restricted to whatever choice the legal aid organization that they're currently working on this legal issue uses, they can take it with. It's also ease of use. So end users can really feel that it's a complicated, overwhelming system, particularly if they have to move around to different places, and we want to make it as easy as possible. So saving time, expense, and frustration, and of having them have to re-enter that same sort of basic information place to place. And so when we were talking initially, Quentin, I think, brought up about the medical information. So it's easy when you go to a new doctor to just, if they have sort of the infrastructure built up, to just transfer all of your medical history to your new doctor. It's sort of a huge pain in the butt when they hand you that huge clipboard full of forms and you like have to sit there for 25 minutes filling out all your shot records. Like there's an easy way to pass that information. Same idea with legal, that in addition to sort of the basic information that we built for the hackathon, we could add additional fields about sort of legal problems that you've had, places that you were referred from, sort of places you've worked with. That can all sort of be stored on your profile. So benefits to interview authors. If you've ever done document assembly projects, they take a lot of time to test, and there's a lot of different avenues that somebody could go down that you have to account for in your testing. So if someone has 4 children, if they have 2 children, if they have no children, if they have one child with one father and one child with another, like the user personas for how much testing you have to do can get a little overwhelming. So if we have these shared answer files, developers could then share these sort of user personas amongst themselves and make it very easy to test your interviews like that. Okay, so next steps are branding. So Russ, I don't know, where's Russ?
I don't see.
Maryland Legal Aid?
Maryland Legal Aid. He had some design experience, or he is a designer. And so we had Russ kind of give us some examples of what could be branding for this. So we have this up there. We as a group sort of decided we liked the middle one with the full circle the best, but open for feedback. And then future features. So we wanted to allow for the merging of profiles in case somebody creates multiple profiles. So they're at Legal Aid X, and then they go to Court Y, and then they have 2 profile me's. Well, how do you merge that data together and ensure that it's still the same exact person when you're pulling it together? We also wanted to give users the ability to edit their profiles independent of an interview. Integration with other existing platforms. So we're not the only 2 document assembly sort of shows out there. We want to be able to open this up and share it with as many platforms as possible. And as Jonathan said, we thought about storing the user profile on the blockchain. So do you guys have anything else?
I point out that it's not just about document assembly necessarily. Like, there are a lot of systems that need to talk to each other. Like, you go to a statewide portal and then you get directed to an online intake. It would be helpful if some of that information could carry over. So online intake and portals are another application of this. If we could get it working in the document assembly community, then it becomes a well-tested standard that could be then used in other contexts like e-filing.
Yeah, and so intakes are a really obvious way to use this. And the other thing that this does is it helps promote a standard set of fields that you're capturing and names for those. So this convention, if someone adopts it in their platform, they don't have to rewrite those questions. They can be translated into 5 different languages, and they can use plain language. And that work's already been done, and you can benefit from it. And you also get to have the benefit of your user can take their data with them and take it wherever they want it to go.
Yeah. Hold on. For the live stream, does the image survive compression was the question.
Well, I think it's important to clarify that's probably not the best way to have our data really transferred. I think the JSON is our first level of doing it, and it was kind of a brainstorming thing, I think.
But the answer is no. But on the other hand, as long as they're not uploading it to Facebook or something, I don't think it's going to recompress. It's a practical matter.
The other thing that we've thought of, which is from the healthcare space, is server-to-server communication. So that happens. There's a standard called, I think it's Blue something, and that happens now. If you go to a new doctor, they're communicating with your other medical providers. They're using probably that exact standard, which came out of healthcare.gov, I believe, is where that kind of started. So that's one other idea, but it takes a lot more engineering work, of course.
In the back.
If you were to stick with the image format, do you use something like a QR code, or do you run out of space too fast?
So yes, we looked into that. A QR code can store up to 3 kilobytes of data. So if it's UTF-8, that's like 1,500 characters, which we didn't think would be quite enough.
Yeah. Actually, I was actually brainstorming that, and there's no reason we couldn't just have like a sheet of QR codes, right? So.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
I guess you're right.
They took a tangent on the QR codes for a while there.
The other thought we did was just like you get sent a blob of base64 encoded data, like SSH keys. That was one idea. It's like maybe a little easier to select the whole block of data. Lots of different ideas. And actually, it's really easy on Androids because they have a file system, but iPhones don't.
All right.
Do you stegangraphically encode the data in the image, or do you just put it in the metadata?
I have no idea. I use the Stegano package in Python, and I think it's in the image. I don't think it's in the metadata.
Yeah,
but-
you
Show the metadata, you can compress it, uncompress it, but it's in the image, then it's in the pixel.
Yeah, I think it's in the pixels.
Well, yeah, it's usually in like the lower half of the least significant bytes.
Yeah.
That's usually what it is, but yeah.
Was there? Yeah.
So, in order for this to work, when you have an interview platform like NJ or Awesome, you also have to basically map those standard fields with whatever interview you want to create, because we need to that is.
So
that's
to
correct.
use it, yes. So the interview that I built, I made variable names that matched the standard. And so that would be part of the training for authors, that going forward, we have a naming convention sort of in the document assembly world. It's a little bit old. And so this would sort of be the new way, that you knew if you wanted your user to be able to take it on and use it, you'd have to name your variables the correct way.
Right. Well, the other option is like what I wrote was the translation code from the JSON to the XML format. So you could theoretically have variable names the same way as the.
You just have to map them.
You just have to map them with the
So you'd have to
code,
map
so-
it if somebody didn't do it. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And on the DocAssemble side, we do a mapping already, actually. So there was kind of a start at developing some standard conventions around variable names. We stuck with those, even though they're different from the schema.org ones, and we map those by default. You can do one more mapping step, of course, inside your interview, and in HotDocs or A2J Author 2, it's just one computation where you're saying copy this variable to this variable name, essentially. But if you use the standards, you don't have to do the work.
That's why we have standards. Or
Any
well.
other questions? Okay, thank you. Are we done? Do you want to skip out?
So we have one more presentation.
One of the great parts about hackathons is working with so many other great people and seeing their projects develop from the planning stage through the day. And so let me put this on view. So my project, my name's Toby Gardefay. I'm a legal aid hotline lawyer in Toledo, Ohio. And we have John. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, and I'm John Jeffcott from Maryland Legal Aid.
And our third team member was Russ Bloomquist, also from Maryland Legal Aid. And our hackathon day was mostly just brainstorming, talking about how we could take the great work of Profile Me and that concept and try to apply it to all kinds of different data that we need to be able to provide effective legal assistance, either through limited assistance like I do, or through an app or an online tool, or sometimes both, with limited assistance by a pro bono attorney being helped by a tool like DocAssemble or A2J Author. So we also wanted to talk, also took inspiration from Quentin, his article that he wrote with Mark Lauritsen about, and at an earlier panel today, about maintaining quality, and we wanted to talk about how possibly we could use standardization to try to achieve some of those goals and overcome some of the obstacles. And I feel like the eviction session in here right before was talking about this need to replace these one-off apps that we are creating with building parts that can be something greater. And that's what I think using standards can do. We can build something for ourselves, but if you do it in a standard way, then other people can take it and use it. So, but talking about maintaining quality, some of the obstacles that we identified in that article are this disconnection between subject matter experts and developers. Sometimes that's a literal disconnection because the developers finished a project and left, or it could be the difficulties in communicating between lawyers and technical people. Another obstacle is that my organization faces are difficulties updating or fixing interviews because of our inability to just change parts of it. The developer has to sort of restructure the code. And it would be a lot easier for us if we could just fix the mistake that we see instead of redoing our branching logic. But I also think part of these problems are just the inherent complexity of law. And it's thinking of a single set of rules that can cover all the crazy situations that humans can find their ways into is just an impossible task. And they made this innovation called the common law to help deal with that. And it's this idea that no single ruler or legislature can foresee all potential outcomes, and we can build a law based on precedent that grows and evolves. And so I think we shouldn't ask developers to create a complete, comprehensive interview that's going to last forever if we don't expect that of legislatures. So, our main goal was sort of trying to do what Jonathan was just talking about, looking at what's out there and using what's already out there, coordinate the existing efforts for standardization of different data that's needed. And just to make it easier, to make it concrete, because it can get too abstract, because standardization's an exercise in abstraction. So to be more concrete, we had a discussion with an eviction defendant persona, and tried to figure out what data she needed to be helped. So we just called her Terry Tennant. And the first questions that we always ask is if someone's LSC eligible. And then what is Terry Tennant's issue? Why is she coming to us asking for help? We need to be able to identify our legal issues. So we'll say for its eviction, when's her court date? What defense is the plaintiff a corporation? All that kind of information's in the court data, and it's something that we could get. What are her legal defenses, which is obviously important. What public information is out there that we can find those legal defenses, if a corporation's registered or not, or if the plaintiff is the property owner, or what kind of housing that the person lives in, that Terry Tennant lives in. What other resources can help? what other resources can help her deal with the situation, what law and legal documents are relevant. And when I think the most important part of the data is Terry's story. And it might be the part that can't be standardized, but I think if we get better at getting all the rest of this information, then we can help her more quickly and spend more time hearing her story. And we can also use these tools to allow more people that don't have the housing expertise to provide the help, but also importantly listen to her story. Because I think someone being able to tell their story and give voice to the problem is just absolutely critical for procedural fairness and people believing that our legal system's just. So what we did was sort of just try to make a map of what we could use to start building these standards on, what guidance is already out there. And now we've got Profile Me to be able to just pull that piece in to ask those standard questions. The National Center for Court Data and how we can find that out, the National Center for State Courts is working on the National Open Court Data Standard. So that could be a resource about how we could structure that data so we can share more easily. The National Housing, sometimes a public a database like the National Housing Preservation Database that we just share nationally sort of creates the naming conventions just because it's the one database we can all use. So we could build a DocSim interview or an A2J interview that queries the National Housing Preservation Database and finds out exactly what type of housing someone lives in. And when we're talking about what kind of other resources, other social services resources that someone can use, we can use open referrals, human services data specification, and work with 211s all over the country that are using that. But I also wanted to mention this possibility too, because you can see what else you can do with the standards is Instant Attorney, and Everett's presentation has taken the HSDS and adapted it to be about legal resources. And so if we're using the same terms, then instead of us having all the resources in our system, then we can sort of ship that to Instant Attorney. So those are all sort of ways that we can use standard terms to access these existing databases that can help our clients in an eviction case. I just want to, and these aren't the only options. This is just sort of like an example of how we can find these type of things and how we can use them. And there's you know, always so many standards. We should make another one, and we could use the ones that we have. I think I messed up that XKCD joke. So I did want to just mention sort of a different type. So for law and legal documents, there's a lot of different ideas about best standards for that. The OASIS in 2018 adopted a Komanotoso as a standard way to represent legal documents in XML, and the United States legislative markup is been implemented here and has put a lot of regulations and code into the XML markup. And then not only does so it can mark up the laws in a way that doesn't disturb, is exactly the same as the way the law is published, but also can make it easy to find and cite specific sections. But you can also annotate the laws to include like the ontologies of legal terms. So that's what we spent most of the day talking about. Are the last two and are pretty important things. So how do we identify the legal issue? What do, so the National Subject Matter Index is something that LSC's been using for a number of years, and the NSMI version 2 is reforming that and trying to reorganize it. We're all helping out with that. I don't know how many hours, but with the learned hands, we're all helping train it for machine learning too. So people's stories we can use natural language processing to determine the story. But we talked about the possibilities that what an extension of the NSMI version 2, if we think about it as a database of these terms that are all objects and they all have attributes, and you can put the descriptions. So that's sort of just like embedding code right into the term, because you can have an attribute with a definition, you can have an attribute with a question, and then we can have a database and we can just build interviews just from using the terms. So this is a DocAssemble demo, really simple demo that's just built.
Toby, I just want to make sure we have some time for questions because we're at 2 minutes.
Okay. So that's just built from this Airtable. All right, so I should probably just go through this last part. And we talked a lot also about this idea of how we can use that same sort of format of taxonomy, an object taxonomy really, to organize the law. And I think that's one reason why this can be effective is because it's sort of this domain-centered development where the developer of our interviews are based more around how we, as lawyers, organize stuff. And instead of flow charts, we use elements tables when we prep for trial, or we break stuff into the single statements or facts because of the rules of civil procedure. And that's the way West Publishing has been organizing stuff for 100 years. But we can do it and share it together. So I guess I'll just wrap it up or see if there's any questions.
Yeah, thanks. I realize also I didn't get anyone a chance to ask the privacy group questions, so if you want to stay up here if there are any questions, and I'm going to invite Michelle and Kate and anyone else who's still here.
Any questions? I have so many questions. Oh, go ahead. Yes.
Privacy information, not at one day, change, but depending on what somebody uses that for, it can be
Actually, there's a tool out there currently that, I mean, there are ways to create a question and answer format for the end user, the consumer. There's did we put it on the resources? We can add it to the resources link, but a tool out there that reads existing,
It's called Pribot, I think.
Pribot, that reads existing privacy terms or privacy policies, or and breaks them down into categories and makes them more searchable, and has a kind of chat interface where you can ask details about a privacy policy. But that is a way to deliver the information to the final consumer.
I think that's a great idea, but I hope that the information can be very concise. That's kind of the point, to just get it to the people very, very quickly and not overwhelm them, which is how we deliver all of our information too. So I hope it never has to be that long or that complex.
Any other questions?
All right. Well, thank you all for coming to the presentation. I think people will stick around for a little bit. And thank you so much.